Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. A lot to cover, Senator. And Joe has the first question. Joe?
So, Senator, we've been talking about a lot of things this morning, but I've also been in touch with Jonathan Lemire, the Associated Press's White House reporter, and we're trying to figure out this coal, the Yankees buying coal for as much money as they threw at him. We're putting down the three greatest scandals in baseball history. Wow. Where does that line up with the steroid scandal of the 1990s and, of course, the 1919 Chicago Black Sox scandal, where they threw the World Series? Where would you put it, at one or two? Where would you put it?
It's ahead of throwing the World Series, but behind the steroids, I'd say. Right in the middle of the pack.
I think you're right. Okay, well, now that we've got that cleared up, I think we have David Ignatius in Washington, D.C. And, David, do you have a question for the senator?
I do. So, Senator Coons, I want to ask you about what we talked about at the beginning of the show today. And that is the really, to us, surprising comments, disturbing comments by Attorney General Barr denouncing his own Inspector General's report. And I want to ask you, you're a careful observer of everything in Washington, including the Justice Department. What did you make of it? What are your concerns going forward?
David, this was a striking action by the Attorney General to try and continue to pump up these fake conspiracy theories that Republicans in support of Trump's campaign to discredit the ongoing impeachment inquiry have been spreading. Later this morning, we're going to have a hearing on the Senate Judiciary Committee about Inspector General Horowitz's investigation, an investigation that concluded that the FBI was without bias and properly and well-founded as they launched the investigation into the then Trump campaign and Russian interference into the 2016 election. That Attorney General Barr dismisses that out of hand, in sharp contrast to the FBI Director, Chris Wray, who stands by the conclusions of the Inspector General, is to me just one more piece of evidence that the Attorney General is not our nation's top law enforcement officer, but is instead acting as President Trump's personal attorney.
Senator, it's Willie Geist. I know we want to come back to this subject, and I'll pass it around, but I noted something yesterday on a different subject that I think deserves some attention, is that you joined Senator Kamala Harris in calling for the firing of Stephen Miller as a senior White House advisor to the President of the United States. This after a former Breitbart editor released all those emails showing that Stephen Miller was in contact with white nationalists, spewing disgusting rhetoric. He still sits at the right hand of the President of the United States. What do you hope happens here beyond his getting fired? How do you think that would even happen?
Well, in any previous administration, someone in the modern era who was revealed to have views so wildly different from what is acceptable in the United States in our modern society would have been thrown out years ago. It tells us everything we need to know about where President Trump is on immigration policy, on his views of people of different racial backgrounds, and where some of his most divisive actions have come from. Those of us in the Senate who've worked on a bipartisan basis to try and resolve some of our impasses over immigration, for example, can see a straight line between Stephen Miller's hateful views and opinions and the decision to separate parents from their children at the border, or the decision to dramatically reduce the number of refugees accepted into the United States. These have long been bipartisan positions, that we don't use cruelty towards immigrant children as a tool of our policy, that as a nation, many of whom came here as refugees ourselves, it is a nation whose families have a history of seeking asylum in this country, where we don't block those seeking refuge. Stephen Miller is, I think, a cancer at the very heart of the values of this presidency. And I hope that more senators will join us in saying these expressed views released in recent emails show that not only is he disqualified from serving, but that President Trump should abandon his hateful rhetoric and move towards representing all Americans.
Good morning, Chris. It's Claire.
Good morning, Claire.
I should tell you that we're going to do special coverage of the hearing in the Judiciary Committee this morning.
Great.
And we're going to try to really focus on this IG report. Tell me who's going to show up as the chairman today. Will it be the groupie, Lindsey Graham, the weird guy that's shown up over the last 18 months, or will it be the thoughtful Lindsey Graham who knows that this Inspector General has incredible respect and support in the IG community as one of the most straight shooters out there? Which one's going to show up?
Of course, I hope that the Chairman Graham, who shows up this morning, will be the seasoned attorney, someone who understands and respects the role of the Inspector General, someone who sounds more like FBI Director Wray, who has accepted the findings of his report. I am concerned that we're more likely to see the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing Lindsey Graham, who is full of aggression and anger and at times even venom, and who is a vigorous, forceful defender of everything President Trump is saying or has said. I'll remind you, President Trump has, since he became president, been claiming that the investigation into his campaign's activities was a witch hunt and a hoax. That's an investigation that produced 6 convictions of some of his most senior folks, his campaign manager, his personal attorney, his national security advisor. And this Inspector General report, Claire, shows that it was without bias and well-founded. That's the conclusion that I hope Chairman Graham accepts in this morning's hearing. But given the current environment here in the Senate, I suspect we're in for a rough ride this morning.
So, Senator Coons, you obviously sat in on the confirmation process for Attorney General Barr. What are your thoughts about how he has evolved as Attorney General, using a combination of faith-based approach to the law, an incredible backing of the president, to the point, as you just pointed out, he appears to be the president's personal attorney rather than the Attorney General of the United States, and now perhaps precipitating a real split between the department he leads that he has attacked, including attacking the FBI. What happens to Chris Wray?
All right. Well, Mike, I've known Chris Wray since law school, and I voted against Attorney General Barr, and I voted for FBI Director Wray in their confirmation hearing processes. And I suspect events in the days and weeks ahead may bear out the differences in their approaches. There are thousands of men and women every day who go to work at the FBI to protect our nation, to keep us safe, and to uphold our laws and Constitution. And the Attorney General of the United States should be the head of the Department of Justice, the person whose personal oath is to the Constitution, not to any one president. I'll remind you, President Trump's got one personal attorney who's currently serving jail time, another one who's mucking around in Ukraine again and has frankly become somewhat of a laughingstock despite his respected tenure as mayor of New York. And so if Attorney General Barr wants to join that company, I think ultimately he'll go down in history as a discredited attorney general. I'm impressed that FBI Director Wray is standing up to President Trump's conspiracy theories and mischaracterizations and is continuing to defend the men and women of the FBI and to accept the IG report.
Elise.
Senator, if I had to guess, I would bet that in today's hearing, the use of FISA to surveil the Trump campaign is going to be a very contentious issue. Do you think that Republicans are moving in the direction of reform of warrantless surveillance, or is this going to be political theater today?
If this were a coherent leadership approach, they would take some of the issues and concerns raised in the report and, as FBI Director Wray has done, embrace them and then talk about responding to them and making sure that we continue to hold federal law enforcement to the highest possible standards going forward. Instead, I'm concerned we'll be treated to more political theater. We've seen some of this tension on other matters and in other committees. You mentioned earlier in the show, in this section, that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo actually publicly challenged Russia's interference in our last election at the same time that the Department of Justice IG's report is being reviewed by the Judiciary Committee this morning. The Foreign Relations Committee is taking up a number of bipartisan bills. This week and next week, we'll be taking up sanctions against Russia and sanctions against Turkey. And I think it's encouraging to see some some bipartisanship here in the Senate. Today, however, at the Department of Justice Inspector General's oversight hearing, I don't expect that. I think we'll just see more political theater.
All right, Senator Chris Coons, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Mika.
Coming up, the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, is standing by. He joined